Everyone, go ahead and begin in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of this day. We thank you for the gift of our lives. And we especially thank you for the gift of mercy and justice that exists in our world, that you bring into our world. Just ask you, Lord, that as we come into today, to take from us the weariness and refresh us, that we can understand more fully where you're actually moving, especially through the personal lives of Brian's and Andy's wife. We just ask you, Lord, to send your spirit upon us. Open up our hearts and minds to further increase in the gift of wisdom, knowledge, and love. We ask all this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
I'd like to welcome everyone to this first of our series and these talks on restorative justice and justice in America and how can we grow in our understanding of this. And so just wanted to be here today to welcome especially the McBrides and Deacon Andy and his wife Kate as they come here to present. And again, thank you very much for being here. I'll turn it over now to Ms. Kelly McGrath, who's going to be our moderator.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm Kelly McGrath. I'm the director of the Florida Restorative Justice Association. It's a statewide organization. We have about 200 members. It's for facilitators and people who are interested in advocating for restorative justice as a way of handling conflict and crime in their communities. We're not saying that there shouldn't be the normal retributive justice system. That definitely, there's a use for that. But in most communities, for many types of conflict and harm, there's other ways to deal with it besides sending people to jail. So one of the leaders of restorative justice is Howard Zehr. And in his book, he defines restorative justice as a process to involve, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in a specific offense, and to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible. And from the International Institute of Restorative Practices, it's the process that gives the victim a forum to ask questions, receive answers, gain understanding, explain the impact of the crime on them, and contribute to the outcome of the process. The process may result in the victim receiving an apology, restitution, services, or some other form of reparation. And it creates a safe environment in which the victim can seek closure. So I don't know how much you need to summarize anything, or should we start with questions?
Let's
Start with questions? Okay. So the first question, and I'm going to let anyone who wants to answer first, and multiple answers are welcome. How does the RJ process work?
Well, at first it was a mystery to us. For those who don't know, in March of 2010, our daughter Anne was shot by her boyfriend Connor and subsequently died from her injuries. And in that process, we were able to forgive Connor. That's not part of the restorative justice process, but we wanted to do something for him and heard about restorative justice. And as Kelly mentioned, the aspect of having a voice in the justice process was very important to us. And the idea that we could somehow have a voice in how Connor was sentenced was also something that we were interested in. So the coming together, face to face, being able to speak to him, being able to hear from him what happened that night, all those things were important to us.
And we went to meet with the assistant state attorney that was prosecuting the case, and he told us that he could charge Connor with a lesser charge, and he mentioned manslaughter. And he goes, he could serve 5 years. And we were taken aback, and he thought we were taken aback because of the lighter sentence. But what we were taken aback about, we realized at that time that maybe there was a part for us to have a say-so in what happened, and that we couldn't just sit by and think that, oh, we as the victims are going to just going to sit there and the state will just take care of everything and do everything. Maybe there's actually a part that we can play in this, and the restorative justice process helped us to play that part.
And one of the things, another one of the aspects of restorative justice that we liked is, as Deacon Andy said, the state attorney said he could charge Connor with manslaughter and he would serve 5 years. And at the time, we were thinking he would have to serve life in prison because of the 10/20 life gun law. But what we wanted more than a lighter sentence per se was a meaningful sentence for Connor. So we talked in the process about having conditions for his probation, such as anger management classes and speaking about teen dating violence. And so those things were important to us, and those aspects that we could ask for and incorporate into his sentence, restorative justice offered us that opportunity.
Do you think restorative justice is soft on crime?
We asked Connor that question just yesterday, and he said the restorative justice circle was the hardest thing he will ever have to do in his life. He had already taken responsibility for his actions, but he had to speak in specifics to what he did, and he had to listen to the impact of those actions on the people it most impacted. So he definitely does not think it's soft on crime.
He was not the only one in the restorative justice circle that thought that. As we were leaving, our attorney said this was the hardest thing he had ever done as well, and he was a defense attorney for years, 30 years. Connor also said that many of the fellows that are incarcerated with him have really not accepted blame or responsibility for what they've done, whatever the crime was. So soft, no. Different, yes.
And I do want to clarify that the process a little bit, and it's everyone that's impacted by the conflict or crime or harm is invited to come together and talk with a facilitator. Before that meeting happens, the facilitator talks to each person individually to get their story, to talk to them about what they hope happens, to tell them about the process. Then they come together, everyone gets to talk about the impact of the act, everyone gets to talk about who has some obligations to make things as right as possible, what those obligations are, and typically an agreement will be written, and in this case, it was presented to the court, and the court made a decision to accept parts of it or tweak it, and that's how this happened. What do you think, what were some of the challenges, or what maybe didn't work as well with the restorative justice process?
Well, I think if I had any regrets about the restorative justice process is that it hadn't been well established in Leon County at all. There are some aspects of the juvenile justice process where we used to have teen court, and there's also a restorative justice process in place for teens for misdemeanor crimes, maybe some minor felony crimes. But because of the severity of this crime, it had never been done before. And so we were working with a system that wasn't used to it. And as Kelly said, part of the process is having everybody who is impacted involved in the process. And we had reached out to the domestic violence community, and unfortunately they did not participate. I wish they could have, but again, the problem with that is, as she said, that you have to meet in advance, and just that mechanism was not in place for us. And I just wish people from the domestic violence community had also been able to participate in the circle. And so that was my only regret, was that it wasn't an established process, and so we couldn't incorporate that into it.
Another thing that happened is at the end of the circle, we first went and talked about what Ann meant to us, and who our daughter was, and what our hopes and dreams and expectations was for her. And then then I asked Connor to tell me what happened, because that's one thing I did not know, is what had happened. And at the end of that, after that was finished, we took a break, and then when we came back, I think Michael and Julie talked about the impact on what had happened to them, because I'm not going to speak too much more, but there's a voice that is hardly ever heard, the voice of the person, of the parents of the people who committed the crime. It's usually, we don't want to hear that voice. But at the end, the disappointment for me was we talked about sentencing, and we talked about what the potential sentencing might be, and as we went around, the assistant state attorney stood up and said, this is a very emotional time. I don't think decisions should be made at a time like this, and I'll take it into consideration, and walked away. And in a restorative justice practice, usually the circle, the people affected, the people harmed, the community, come to a mutual decision, so that the offender can freely accept that thing or not. But if we freely accept a decision made for us, we will do it. But if I tell you, well, you must do this, there's going to be potential resentment and say, I don't want to do it. And so if you agree, you freely potentially could serve your time in a way that you've agreed to it. But when you have a judge that hands it down to you, dictating it to you, there's probably some resentment. In fact, I know there's some resistance, and probably that's what causes some issues that we have.
At the end of the circle, Jack Campbell was still there, and we thanked him for participating, and he said, normally I would not have met you, and I would not have wanted to meet you. And that wasn't a statement of spite or malice. It was just a statement of fact. It's the judicial system works. So the challenge is, in our process, the challenge was allowing for this variation to that very established process. The other challenge that I did want to mention is the rapport of the victim's family and the offender's family is often a hurdle in these cases. And at the time, we visited Ann in the hospital and got to know Andy and Kate as much as you can in a situation like that. And then Andy and I started having lunch together, and we gained a rapport of parents who both lost a child in this tragedy. But that was a big step, because that really allowed for the interaction to start in much quicker than it would have otherwise.
I think it's obvious, but there's an impact on y'all about all this. And as he said, they're never heard from. And if y'all have ever been the parents or been involved in it, of the offender, you're never allowed to speak, and you might feel that no one ever wants you to speak, that you have nothing to say. And so I think one of the things about restorative practices is it allows all of us to speak, because we've all been harmed.
What did the restorative justice process provide you that the traditional court process did not? I know we've touched on a few things, but if there's anything additional you can add.
I'll go first. I kind of mentioned it. I saw my daughter on Saturday night at 5 p.m. And the next time I saw her, she was in the hospital on Sunday at about 5 o'clock. And one of the things as a person, as a father, I want to know what happened, because in my own mind, I made up things. I thought about what I could have done or should have done all during Saturday night or Sunday, about how I could have changed what happened, because that's what I really needed. I needed to try to change those things, and I needed to try to figure out, and in some ways I blamed myself for, because absence of any information, you fill in the gaps. And so I found out exactly what happened. It was very hard. It was very difficult to hear. I tell people, stories and poems talk about your heart breaking and your heart hurting. I can tell you, physically, my heart hurt. I'd never felt that sensation before, but my heart hurt. It physically hurt. And but in the end, I had a sense of peace, because I knew exactly what happened to my daughter. And there was nothing I could have done about it, as much as I wanted to. So that gave me a great sense of peace and understanding.
Because it gave Connor a chance to speak with you both and to hear you. He's been able to heal better than anyone I think could have thought possible. If he had not had Kate's forgiveness, I think he would still be curled up in an infantile ball in many ways.
We would be too, Julie.
I know.
I think, we just can't emphasize enough the idea that the victims have a voice. And when we went to see Jack Campbell, and I know he might, I don't want him to come off sounding like, a villain or our opposition in all of this. It was just a different process for him. And he had a way of taking care of things. And his attitude was, don't worry, you won't have to see Connor or talk to Connor. What he didn't know is we had already seen Connor. We'd already been talking to Connor. I will take care of everything for you. And while that is very attractive from an emotional point of view, the idea of going to court, the idea of testifying was very hard. Taking that away, it's just one more thing that's taken from us and gives us a further sense of powerlessness. And you hear that word empowerment and it kind of gets used so often, but there's a truth in that. There's a truth in that as Anne's parents, we wanted to be her advocate. We appreciated everything Jack Campbell did and his expertise, but we also we needed that voice. We wanted to tell people, and because of because we had forgiven Connor, that was a big part of it, and we wanted to know, we wanted people to know that we were willing to extend, our mercy to him. And that was one of the things we could never talk about when we visited him in jail is, the topic of what had happened that day was, it just could not be discussed. That's something that's never discussed in the criminal justice system, and so many victims end up never knowing the answers to those questions.
I told Jack Campbell he would never take me away from being my daughter's advocate, and I said it very seriously, very sternly toward him. And I think any parent out there would say the exact same thing, because when he said that, I think Kate says in her book that she saw me kind of rise up in my chair, and I got my stern look on it because he was telling me that I was not going to be a father to my child anymore, and that was just not going to happen. And so it's our only experience with the justice system. I can't imagine that happening all the time to people. That that it's like you said, you're taken away and you're just told to sit in a corner. One thing I would say that if it had gone to trial, the one defense, one of the defenses the defense would have raised, because that's what they do. They're hired to do the best for their client, and that's their job, and there's nothing personal about it. But one of the defenses they would have said is, my daughter deserved it, and I would not have liked to have gone through that trial. That would have been very, I don't know what would happen, but I would not have liked that part at all. Might have been some yelling and screaming going on there.
The process gave us a sense of hope. When we met with Connor's defense lawyer the very first time, he said, all I can do is mitigate down a life sentence. For a 19-year-old, that's a long time. But it allowed for an alternative. And Connor was very adamant about not wanting to go to trial either. The defense attorney was really there to help us navigate the waterway. The Restorative Justice Circle, the back and forth with prosecutor and defense attorney. There would have been no way for us to know how to weather that. So the defense attorney was there as our supporter. But we felt, and Connor felt, that a trial wasn't the right way to go. And for us, the right way to go was the Restorative Justice Circle, because that really allowed the dialogue that would not have been there in a trial. A trial would have been adversarial between the parties, and the circle was not. It was a painful number of hours, but it was well worth it for all parties.
It allowed for healing for all parties, yeah.
And I do want to make it clear too, that this process is only used when the victims or the people harmed want to meet. That's number one. And then the second tier is the person who did the harm admits accountability and wants to make things as right as possible. So it's not used in any other case except for when the person does it already admit accountability and wants to make it better. So those were met here. So what did, and we talked about this a little bit, but what did this process provide you as parents of children involved in this tragedy?
I think it gave my daughter a sense of peace, that we were actively involved in determining what would happen with Connor. I mean, Connor was her fiance. They'd known each other for 3 years. We'd known them for 3 years, known him for 3 years. And I think it gave a sense of peace to my daughter. And I think that's what she would have wanted. I don't think she would have wanted to see Connor locked away for the rest of his life. I do not think that's what she wanted. She was a compassionate, kind person to all living things, even the smallest of animals. And we, just an example, we used to have to stop the car whenever she saw a turtle on the road and get out and pick up the turtle and take it across the road, whether, it's going to be on my epitaph, run over by a car while helping a turtle. I mean, but I mean, she very compassionate and kind, and to me, part of what happened is, when Connor locked himself in his house and threatened to kill himself, she got back inside, and I think I truly understand that, even though part of me wish she hadn't done it, but I know that she was going to help him.
I think it still goes back to hope, provided hope for Connor, for us. A key point that we can't say enough of is it allowed Connor to say exactly what happened, again, to the people he most impacted. And that allowed for a process in Connor of self-forgiveness, which he still struggles with, and he will always struggle with. But it provided an opportunity for a start to healing in Connor, and for us too.
How has restorative justice changed your view of the legal process?
Well, as Deacon Andy said, this may have been our first encounter with the legal process. There was a little, as a matter of fact, it was Anne had taken a little penknife to school that she kept in her pocket, never took out of her pocket, but she told a friend who told the teacher. She was sent to the principal's office and asked to empty her pockets, which is an illegal search, and was arrested. So we do have a little bit of experience. And actually, in that process, she went to teen court, which is kind of like a restorative process where your peers decide what type of punishment you should receive. Anyway, the legal system, even in that case, and especially in Connor's case, is so adversarial. They immediately set up this us against them attitude, and Connor was coached, as well as everybody, you know, who's done anything wrong is coached by their defense attorney, never to say anything, ever. Don't ever say anything. And, you know, I'm sure that includes ever saying you're sorry for what you did, because, you know, saying you're sorry is like an admission of guilt. So it's just drilled into them, to the point that, you know, as I think Michael or Julie said, that they, you know, they don't even admit to this day that they did anything wrong. And I think it probably just changes. You know, you tell yourself a lie often enough, it becomes a truth to you. And so it sets up, you know, this adversarial position that we weren't in when we went into it because of our forgiveness of Connor. But, you know, the justice system was going to set that up. It's like, you know, the Grosmaires are over here and Connor's over there. And, you know, for me, through this whole process, it was bigger. I always knew it was bigger than the McBrides and the Grosmaires, that what we were doing was showing people that there's a different way, that, you know, just because someone hurt you, you know, and they don't hurt just, you know, the whole community suffers because of that. And the best way to heal the whole community is not to have two sides. It's somehow to bring everybody in the community together, because Connor is going to be released from prison. He is going to come back most likely to Tallahassee and live in this community again. And we can't keep, you know, deciding that just because everybody did something wrong, now we'll toss them away to prison for as long as we possibly can. And then, you know, when we bring them back, we won't let them live anywhere near us, or we won't let, you know, there's all these restrictions. You can't keep, you know, doing that and expect to have any kind of society. You know, we have to be inclusive. And so for me, that's, you know, just the idea that it's, you know, it's all less adversarial when you have a restorative justice process, and we're reaching out, you know, if not in love, just with compassion to others.
I'd like to add something to that. Another thing that that Kate always says, and I'll say it for her, and maybe if she wants to finish up, she can, but if we define Ann by that one day, she's a murder victim. That's not who she is. It's not a victim of violence. That's not who my daughter is. And neither is Connor. Connor is not a murderer. He committed a terrible act and he took somebody's life. That is without a doubt. But that is not who he's defined as ever. You know, we were created for goodness. And, you know, circumstances cause tragedy and this event to happen without a doubt. And Connor did need to go to prison because he did need to be kept safe from others. And he needs to learn, he needs to learn things on how to control his temper and how to do anger management and to grow as a person. To be, but he can't come back. He's a brilliant person. He was headed for Stanford, if I remember right. He had opportunities to go to Stanford. Yeah, and so a brilliant young man. And we, you know, when somebody leaves our community, we have that. There is a loss to our community of their ability, skills, knowledge, all those things, and we are something less. And that person will come back to our community. And how do we want them to come back? Is the things that Kate talked about.
Sounds like you just answered this question, but how has your restorative justice process benefited our community here?
I can say something really fast. Recently, one of the persons running for assistant state attorney, Jack Campbell, and his
for state attorney now.
State attorney had in his platform a restorative justice plank, I guess is what you would call it. But I will say this: I thought it'd be more happening, because, you know, I really thought that we had cracked the door open, and I kept hoping it'd get pushed more open. Maybe it has, but it doesn't seem like it has. I'd have to ask Kelly that, but.
Starting slowly.
Well, I think definitely people, I mean, when we met with Father Allison DeFore, an Episcopal priest who worked at Wakulla, correctional institution, he said, well, you're Catholic, you know about restorative justice, and we had never heard those two words put together in that phrase, restorative justice, and went home and Googled it and had to learn about it, and we had to learn that it was something that we were interested in. So it didn't, we didn't just say, hey, let's do this. And so our story, because it was the first murder case adjudicated before trial through a restorative process, has caused a lot of people to read those two words, restorative justice, together. And especially in Tallahassee, I think a lot of people now have heard of it, and people are asking for it. I mean, like Deacon Andy said, not to the extent that we maybe would like for them to, where there's actually a process in place in Leon County, but like I said, people are asking about it, and the more they ask about it, the more I think people will understand and be willing to implement it in the school system, in the juvenile justice system, and in the adult system as well.
I think the movement is slow, but there's an awareness. That's what the case has brought, an awareness to the community about restorative justice, and it doesn't have to be in the judicial system, as Kelly knows. It can be in the school system. Kelly is involved with the community centers. So I think right now it's really an awareness. People have asked us as well, what was it like? How is it different?
One thing Connor's defense attorney said is he raised his hand at one of the lunches at the Association for the State of Defense Lawyers, and he asked, had anybody heard of restorative justice? And nobody raised their hand. But then he said everybody wanted to talk to him about it. And that's just, these are the people that are in the current process, and they want to know this variation. They want to know more about this, and they were very excited that it was actually being used in a felony case, and how it was being used in a felony case. So it's that awareness that even for the people that are entrenched in the current process.
So I can speak a little bit about what's happening locally here. Our mayor, before he was mayor, he helped keep the Palmer Monroe Teen Center open. It was going to close, and he convinced the other county commissioners to put some funding towards that. And as part of that, he wanted a restorative justice program for teens. So there's a program called Community Connections right now. It's 15 juveniles every 13 weeks. They're referred by the state attorney or by the school if they're about to get expelled or if they get arrested. And they have two trained facilitators there, and then some volunteers. I volunteer, and we will, they'll go through and talk to the teen, what happened, they'll get their file. They'll call the person who was harmed and try to have the one-on-one meetings with everyone and set up a meeting with the family of the teen, the person harmed, and their support system, and then some community members, because any kind of harm is also a rip in the fabric of community. So we try to get all those parties together, and then they have the circle. Everyone talks about the impact of what happened, who has the obligations to make things right. They craft an agreement, and then the teen agrees that they will go to the teen center for 13 weeks. And there's classes, there's like kind of an emotional training classes to help them deal with any kind of triggers that they have, but also the staff helps them work their agreement, whatever that is, to restitution, apology letters, whatever it is, they help work that. And then at the end, we have another circle with the same group of people, and they can be very emotional as well because of the profound changes in the teen and the satisfaction of the person harmed when they see things being made right, apologies happening. It's overwhelmingly satisfied people in our community going through this process. So that's what's happening right now. Now that their funding was almost cut this year. So, and they're paying the lady that's in charge, and she's doing this deep work, almost peanuts, but she's doing it for the love. And I just have to say that because she definitely deserves a raise. But they almost closed it this year. They didn't there was an outcry of parents who had had their teens go through this program. They called the county commission and they got the money in the budget. So we have it now. It was expanded actually this summer to another teen center with one other training facilitator. The problem with expanding it, of course, is getting the person trained. Really, it's kind of deep work and they really need to know what they're doing. That's for the teens. We also have a civil citation program for adults here. So any police officer who on the scene can make a decision, do I arrest this person or do I give them a civil citation? Now there's not a restorative justice process with the civil citation yet, but we've been in contact with the powers that be to try to get that, to try to allow a restorative justice process for those cases where the person who got the civil citation admits accountability and wants to make things better and the person harmed wants to meet. So we would like that to happen. Right now they go to this center called This Village and that they go through a computerized intake program, and the actual entity kind of tells them what they need to do to make restitution. So sometimes there's community service and other things. They're leaving out the component that is essential, and that's the people who are harmed having a say in what happens, okay? So, but that is a good step, right? We don't want everyone jailed for every little thing, but that's what's happening here. Cindy Bigby, who's in charge of the Community Connections Program, and myself, last September, we went to the Supreme Court. Florida Supreme Court asked us to do a presentation for their court education program. So 19 lawyers and judges, we trained them on what this was and how it's been used in Florida. Justice Pariente has, one of the Supreme Court justices in Florida, has mentioned restorative justice in two of the cases that they heard, and the benefit of it. So it's definitely on everyone's radar. It's if we keep asking for it, someone will figure out how to put money in the budget to actually pay people to do this work. And that is really bottom line what we need to happen here. So it is, and there's 200 members in Florida, throughout Florida, doing this work as well in some form or another, but mostly teens right now. Other states like Colorado have it for adults. They have a pilot program with 6 different counties doing this work. They've just passed their 2-year mark. And overwhelmingly low repeat offender rate, low recidivism rate, much lower than this normal rate, which is almost 30%. It's down to like 9% for restorative justice process, and high satisfaction in the 90% satisfaction rate for people that went through this process, the people who were harmed. So we would love to have all of you, thank you for supporting this here and learning about it, and I think we have time for some questions.
It seems like there's 3 different things that have to happen. First, the defense attorney has to be involved with his client. The client has to accept responsibility. And that's probably the biggest dip in the whole thing, is growing up without having had to do that. Mm-hmm. Always getting a pass, and all of a sudden now you've got something you can't get a pass on. Mm-hmm. But that child learning to accept the responsibility. The defense attorney saying, okay, we've got something to do here. Mm-hmm. But those 2 things almost like, and the last thing the defense attorney is going to tell you is say anything.
Right. So the process that was used here was one of the rules of criminal procedure, 3.171, Florida Rules of Criminal Procedure, which allows the 2 attorneys to meet in a confidential meeting that is not brought, whatever is said in there is not allowed to be brought later to court. So that's how, I don't want to say get around but pre-plea agreement or pre-plea conference. So in that's something that training attorneys will take some time, especially a defense attorney who wants to protect their client.
But I would also say that how many crimes are committed because it's a moment of passion, or it's a moment somebody makes a bad decision. You know, it's not a repetitive, it's not somebody, a burglar who's committed burglary their whole life. But you know, it's kids going, hey, it's Friday night, I don't know if they've been drinking or not, but hey, let's take that car. Somebody's, you know, Bob there's got a really cool Corvette. Let's break into it. I know how to hotwire a car and drive it off. And something, you know, that maybe they wreck it, or you know, maybe they hurt someone, or you know, it could be all kinds of possibilities. Is that really the answer? Is to put them in jail for 30 or 40 years? Well, yeah, they made a very bad decision, but they impacted many people when they stole that car. They impacted you because maybe that was the car you remember your father had, and you restored it lovingly, and it reminded you of your father and the people, the car that it hit the tree that I planted in the honor of my daughter or son who died at a young age. I mean, you could just build these stories of these people, but we all have those stories. And so to me, restorative justice is very good at that. But even on the repetitive crimes, like you said, maybe no one's ever had to take responsibility. They say in burglaries many times, the burglars will put the pictures down because they want it impersonal. They don't want it personal. But when you make it personal, it's hard. I mean, we all remember that as kids, right? When you did something wrong and your parents pointed out, it got personal. Yeah, you don't want that. We didn't want that. But I also remember one of the neighbors broke the neighbor's window with a baseball because they hit it, they hit a home run. And he didn't go to jail. The neighbor made him come and fix that window. But nowadays, I feel like the police would come, arrest that person, and haul him away.
And I think it is important to remember that, like Deacon Andy said, I mean, even if they don't go to jail for 30 years, there was a young man in our neighborhood who stole a neighbor's car and went to jail for, I know, less than 2 years for sure, probably maybe just around a year. And then later stole things out of people's carports and garages, took a 6-pack of beer out of their refrigerator, and the community, our community, the neighborhood that we live in, people were very angry and they wanted this kid to go back to jail. Well, is that really what is he going to learn? He's going to learn better ways to steal from people, and so if it can't work for someone who's already burgled 5 houses, maybe it can work for that kid that, it's just their first or second time. And if the community, if he could have sat down and said, okay, I'll replace those CDs, I can replace, a 6-pack, hey, whatever, it costs, do you know how much? It costs like $17,000 to keep someone incarcerated for a year in the Leon County Jail, or if not more. And you think of, he stole less than $1,000 worth of stuff, but we're going to spend $17,000 or more keeping him incarcerated. So,
I think one of the points on your statement that is of good importance is the defense attorneys work within the current process, and that current process is you don't say anything, you don't say I'm sorry, you don't talk to anybody, you don't say anything over the phone. It's a very rigid keep your mouth shut and we'll see what comes out in trial. With Connor accepting responsibility in the restorative justice process, that took the defense attorney out of that mindset. And so that allowed for him to understand the alternative, take responsibility, get all parties to discuss it. And that's a big change. That was a big change for him.
I do want to add one more thing that is happening in Leon County that's very exciting. I work at the Department of Children and Families, and not related to restorative justice in any way, not with the kids. I work in contracts. Anyway, I've been pushing them and teaching them about restorative justice though, and they just hired a restorative justice facilitator to teach group home staff, which is foster kids who do not have foster parents. So they go into a group home, which is two or three shift workers and 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 kids in one home, to teach them about this process. So what we're finding at DCF is that a lot of times the staff at the group homes are not able to handle, for whatever reason, different things that come up when kids who have been traumatized all their life and taken away from their parents act out like we expect them to do. So they would steal from another kid's room or have a fight, and what the staff is doing is they're calling the police and having them arrested or Baker acted or moving them to another group home.
So it's further traumatizing not only them, but all the other kids in the group home. So DCF has just hired someone. We have a willing group home here that wants to learn, Boys Town. And we're really so excited about it. And I'm kind of helping oversee that and just trying to make sure it goes well. But it hasn't started yet, but the group home staff is going to be trained in January. And we're really hopeful for better outcomes for our kids who live in Leon County. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Great, it's all right, you're doing great. Kelly, I want to congratulate you on everything that you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
With the Restorative Justice Program. I became intimately aware of Restorative Justice when I was doing peace work in Northern Ireland
Okay, yes.
and working with at-risk children. This was in the late 90s and up to mid-2000, 2005, so still in contact with them a little bit. And if they had a hard road over there, the Catholics and the Protestants, everything, they had two different programs there, one for the Catholics, one for the Protestants, but now they're bringing it together here. But you made a lot of progress. What I saw over there was the need to bring the police departments and the attorneys, defense attorneys, and the state attorneys together, and the judicial system, all in one room. And you get them together with the community and say, this is what we want. This is what we want you to do. And it took about a year or so for them to do it. They modeled their program on one from University of Minnesota, I think. Okay.
Right, okay.
It took a while, but everything that you said here is exactly right. Get these people out of the judicial system. Have the victims recognized as part of the system. Okay. And it does work. It really does work.
Yeah.
One question I have is, each of y'all mentioned something about the circle. Does the circle include everybody that is affected, including neighbors, relatives other than the parents, employees, employers?
It can, yeah, it can, yeah. And I mean, I would encourage it to be as wide as possible, as everyone's comfort level
Right. It's very important to have everybody that is touched by this.
Just to put that in perspective, is we have a special needs daughter, and
You and Connor.
and yeah, they were very close, and she didn't understand the full scope of what happened. Knew Connor did something bad and hurt Ann, and he has consequences. You know the terms that she understands, and we asked her to speak to that, and we videoed her, and we played that video in the circle, so her voice was heard.
Even though she couldn't have been in the circle physically, she was part of the circle, so yes.
One thing that is in your favor, I think, right now is an election process. Mr. Campbell has his on the his plate. How about the sheriff department?
Yeah, I have been trying to contact them, and I haven't had some as good of response as I've hoped for. But if anyone here knows anyone, I'd be happy to afterwards give you my name and contact me around that, because yeah, I would love to have more connection with the police, and you know, they take a lot of their direction from the state attorney's office too, so working, you know, hand in hand with them would be lovely. Yeah, and what I envision it to be here in Leon County would be the victim assistance program or the victim services. They would hire one or two people that are trained to do just this in the cases where the person who did the harm admits accountability, wants to make things better, and the person harmed really wants to meet. In those cases, I think that would work great, and I really only think we would need like one or two people to do that, starting out anyway.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
We still have time for more questions, don't we?
We do, if we have it.
Well, I just want to say that there's another aspect to restorative justice. Will they be speaking about victim offender dialogue?
Yes.
So there's,
Yes,
yeah,
there's that,
victim
too.
offender dialogue, people will be speaking about that in one of the other classes. But if the opportunity doesn't exist prior to incarceration, because of the adversarial position, you know, there are a lot of, you know, just because the defense attorney coaches you not to say anything doesn't mean One of the things, if we remember George Zimmerman, in the Trayvon Martin case, when he initially went into court, he turned towards Trayvon Martin's mother and said, "I'm sorry." Well, you couldn't see the defense attorney grab him quickly enough and can you imagine how differently that story could have turned out? Because from that, we know he was sorry, but, it was more important to not have that narrative play out. So there is the opportunity for incarcerated men to sit down with victims, not necessarily the victim of their crime, but with someone who experienced a similar crime, like if it were a burglary, then someone who has experienced a burglary to sit down face to face with them and explain to them the impact of that. And so it's very beneficial to them before they're released, and brings to them that same message, and they gain empathy. We heard a man talk and say he was robbed at a ATM, and he would go to prisons and talk to the prisoners, and the man robbing him was going to spend the money for drugs. And as he was sitting in the circle, one of the men started crying, and he said, what's that about? And he said, I sold drugs, and I always thought that was a victimless crime, because the people who I sold them to wanted to buy them, and if that's their choice. He said, it never occurred to me that these people were going out and doing these things, that someone shot you and stole your money at an ATM in order to buy drugs from me. And it changed him. It changed him. That's what part of what restorative justice does. It draws us back together as a community. It reconnects us as individuals. And there's so many times when prisoners want to reach out, offenders want to reach out to their victims and tell them they're sorry, and they're prevented. Forget convincing someone that they're sorry for what they did. Let's just start with the people who are sorry for what they did.
Connor has...
I was just going to say, and allow them to say that.
Connor has taught victim awareness and restorative justice in the facilities he's been in. And when he starts the victim awareness program, he's amazed at how the men he's talking to all believe they're the victims. By the end of the course, they realize that that's not the case.
That's not the case at all.
And in the restorative justice program that he does, he works to allow the men to understand how that dialogue can be freeing, not only for them, but for the victims or the victim's family. And through that process, some of the men have written to the victims' families. Some of the men have connected with the victims or the victim's family. You have to think of where my son is. He's in the C4 level. That's the murderers, right? And so the men he's talking to are all there for a pretty hardcore felony. But he's able to touch them with the understanding that they aren't the victims, and that they can make a difference to the others that are victims.
How does this process get initiated? If someone is arrested or if someone is a victim of a crime, we know the perpetrator is arrested, taken to jail, the victims are questioned. At what point and how do those on either side get involved in this process?
Well, I'll let them speak to their particular case, but in other states where this is actually in place, like Colorado, the victim services people that are attached to the state attorney's office would contact the victim and say, we've heard from the defense attorney that this person who did you harm has admitted accountability and wants to meet with you. Are you willing to meet? And I'll say yes or no. And so it's a coordination between the state attorney and the defense attorney in other states. So here for the juvenile program that we have here,
every Tuesday, there's like a, I can't remember exactly the name, Juvenile Action Committee or something like that. They come together every Tuesday, and the state attorney is there, and all the different services, diversion program representatives are there, like Community Connections, which is our restorative justice program here, and Teen Court, and I think there's another diversion program. They come together, and the state attorney's office representative will say, here's the cases that came through, and they'll not dole them out, but mindfully distribute them depending on what they think is the best fit. And I don't know exactly what their parameters are around what they think is the best fit, which program they think is the best fit for the particular case. But in the cases that the Community Connections program, the child has admitted accountability. They haven't fought like, oh, I wasn't fighting with him, or I didn't steal that car. They've admitted it. So that is step one, how it's done here in Tallahassee. Yeah. So the victim offender dialogue, though, that is a process where it's the person's already been convicted, they're in jail, and there's no agreement made. It's just the person who was harmed really has something to say, or they have questions. And the same thing happens. There's a facilitator that will meet with both of them individually could be for many months to prepare them, and then they come together and meet. And we're hoping that is going to be allowed in Florida. Right now, it's currently not allowed in Florida. It's allowed in almost every other state. So, and luckily, the parole board, which is called something else now, offender review board, right? That
Offender review board.
they've just been trained on what this is, and Kate was part of that. So we thank you for that, because that's going to help a lot of families find some closure and healing.
Well, thank you for all. The Grosmaires and McBrides being here, especially being here and facilitating this conversation. Just so you know, what's coming next week is Marietta Lane, who had a child kidnapped and has been very involved in the death penalty and things of this nature, will be coming in and speaking next week on the same series of topics. So if you enjoyed today's topic, please share this with your friends, as well as, again, as we grow in our understanding of this topic, which is very, very important, especially in today's modern society, where justice, what we see in our society, is so needed. So again, thank you once again.
And I do want to offer that I am available if you do have a conflict and you really want to try to resolve it in this way, without going to the court system, you'll have my contact information. So I do this for my community. There's 5 of us in our community that are trained, and actually I just did one for a group with vandalism of a house. So while we don't have any kind of paid program yet, I'd love to do this as service to the community. So just if you reach out if you need it.
Thank you all, and again, close the room. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time today. Thank you for giving your mercy and justice. We just ask you, Lord, to continue to open up our understanding and our minds to see and encounter your healing power in the world and bring that to the world in a more full and loving manner. We ask all this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Amen.
Father, Son,